Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at global alternatives to the traditional colonoscopy. We're going to explore a pretty massive philosophical divide in how different countries approach one of the most common preventative health measures on the planet. It's really a fascinating story about what we call the paradox of perfection in public health. Right off the bat, we are not medical professionals. Please consult your own healthcare provider for personal medical advice. In this explainer, we're simply breaking down the published data and looking at global public health policies. We're just here to look at the numbers, the trends, and the science behind these strategies. Now, if you take away just one single thing from this entire explainer, it's gotta be this golden rule. The absolute best colorectal cancer screening test is simply the one that you will actually do. As we'll see in the data, having a mathematically perfect medical procedure, well, it's completely useless if a patient just refuses to walk through the clinic doors.
So, keeping that golden rule in mind, what is the absolute best way to screen for this disease without letting the fear of the procedure totally scare you away? Well, depending on where you live, the medical establishment actually has wildly different answers to this exact question.
And the global landscape brilliantly illustrates a massive philosophical divide. Over in the US, as well as places like Germany and Austria, the system pushes hard for regular colonoscopies as the primary go-to screening tool. But look at the vast majority of other wealthy developed nations, like the UK, Canada, France, and Denmark. They don't really offer colonoscopies to average risk folks as a primary screen. Instead, they rely on a highly systematic approach using at-home FIT stool tests every 1 to 2 years. To understand why this divide exists, we really have to look at human behavior. In the US, the system is what's called opportunistic. It completely relies on you, the patient, to proactively schedule an appointment, take time off work, and endure that notoriously dreaded colonoscopy prep. And because of all those hurdles, adherence just sits at a lackluster 50 to 60%. Literally, nearly half the eligible population is completely avoiding their screening. But let's look at how this plays out over in Europe. By intentionally sacrificing the perfect preventative accuracy of a colonoscopy for the sheer absolute convenience of an easy-at-home test, their participation rates absolutely soar. Because the system automatically mails a simple kit out to citizens, adherence jumps up to, in some countries, over 80%. It turns out, when you actually remove the barriers, people are way more willing to participate in their own healthcare. Let's look at exactly how this works on the ground. Countries like the UK, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Finland run these highly organized programs. They literally mail a poop screening test right in a prepaid envelope directly to the homes of eligible adults every 2 years. Other nations, like France and Luxembourg, use a voucher model. They just mail you a ticket to go grab a free kit at your local pharmacy. Basically, they make it incredibly frictionless. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Handling your own stool at home? Yeah, that sounds a little icky. And the ick factor is totally real. But when faced with the alternative, a massive portion of the population clearly prefers a quick at-home sample over the intensive prep factor. I mean, people would much rather deal with a mail-in kit than the fasting, the massive jugs of liquid laxatives, and the invasive nature of a hospital scope. So the crucial point here is this massive public health trade-off: accuracy versus participation. Is it better for a population to have a virtually perfect test that people actively avoid, or a pretty good test that people actually do? Many European countries have decided that a slightly less accurate test, taken by 80% of the population, will ultimately manage the disease burden way more efficiently across millions of people than a perfect test that half the country just ignores. Okay, so does that trade-off actually work? Let's look at the mortality data. The U.S. approach is undeniably successful on an individual level. In 2022, the U.S. had a colorectal cancer mortality rate of just 16 deaths per 100,000 people. And that's because a colonoscopy doesn't just detect cancer. The doctor can actively, physically remove precancerous polyps right then and there. They are literally preventing the cancer from ever forming. Meanwhile, the country is relying primarily on stool tests like the UK, Spain, and the Netherlands. Well, they do see a slightly higher mortality rate, hovering right around 20 to 24 deaths per 100,000 people. Because stool tests are much better at detecting cancer that already exists, rather than finding those early precancerous polyps, they do lose a little bit of that pure preventive power. But notice that the numbers really aren't wildly different. You're looking at 16 versus roughly 22. So on an individual level, a colonoscopy may be slightly better than a poop test, but because compliance is just so much higher with that prepaid envelope, overall mortality rates end up being about the same, which brings us right back to our central thesis. The best test is the one you actually do.
let's actually compare the success rates of the three main types of tests available today. We have the gold standard colonoscopy, stool DNA tests like Cologuard, and those newly FDA-approved blood tests like Shield. The colonoscopy catches about 95% of cancers. But look at the stool DNA test. It's incredibly close, detecting between 92 and 94%. The blood test lags a bit behind at roughly 83%, mostly struggling with early-stage disease. But here's where we see a pretty dramatic drop-off: detecting precancerous polyps. If you want to prevent cancer before it even starts, there is a massive gap in performance here. The stool DNA test catches about 43% of advanced precancerous polyps. The blood test? It only catches about 13%. Why? Well, blood tests look for tumor DNA circulating in the bloodstream after cancer has formed. Those small, early-stage polyps simply don't shed enough DNA into your blood to trigger a positive result reliably, whereas they do shed cells directly into your digestive tract for a stool test to catch. But here's the catch, and it's absolutely critical to understand this when choosing your path. Neither non-invasive test replaces a colonoscopy entirely. In countries that use mail-in kits, the colonoscopy is reserved as a secondary diagnostic tool. If you take a stool test or a blood test and you get a positive result, you absolutely must get a follow-up scope so your doctor can locate and confirm the source of that abnormal DNA. As we bring this explainer to a close, let's return to our golden rule one final time. If the prep of a colonoscopy is preventing you from getting screened entirely, a stool test is a fantastic option. If the ick factor of a stool test is stopping you, getting a simple blood draw is vastly better than doing nothing at all. Please discuss with your healthcare provider to figure out exactly which option is best for your specific risk profile. But whatever you do, please don't let the fear of an invasive scope or a needle or dealing with a little bit of poop scare you away from getting screened. The science has given us incredible, varied tools to manage this disease. You just have to find the one test that you will actually do. So, knowing the incredible options available to you today and understanding how different countries successfully tackle this exact same challenge, which test will you commit to actually getting done? Find the one that works for you and take control of your health. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.